I'd like to welcome the Process Art Discovery audience. Today, I'm Lynda Norman. I'm a watercolor artist here in British Columbia. And today we're going to talk about watercolor on 300-pound 100% cotton paper. We'll walk through the steps to show you how illumination plays into a painting and how beautiful that can be. Today I've got this amazing piece of 300-pound Arche 100% cotton paper. It came on a bigger sheet, the full sheet, which is 22 inches by 30 inches, and I've cut it down. So this is a quarter sheet. If you can see the lovely decal edge that it comes with, because I've scored it and torn it, I have a bit of a rough edge. I kind of really love that, and you know, if I wanted to not mat it and frame it, I could actually secure this to the surface of a nice mat board or a piece of wood, a cradle board, and leave that decal edge showing just for a bit of texture added to the painting. Today, I really wanted to talk about adding illumination to a painting. It's important. It helps to add depth to your painting. Using the right colors, the combinations. Often people talk about mixing paint and getting mud. So we're going to stick to the 3 or 4 basic colors that I like to use. I really find that they work well for me. And mixing shades that blend and enhance each other. As you know, I'm a landscape artist, so we'll stick with landscapes. When I sit down to paint, very rarely will use a reference. I like to just often get an idea of where things might lay out in my landscape design. Trees in the background. The further back, I want them to be a little bit diffused. My skies often are the focal point. Today, I think we'll leave the skies more in the background, and then bring the focal point more in with some light play happening. One of my favorite paintings that I've done in the past has a bit of a nice light walkway coming sort of through the painting from the forested area. So we'll start with that. You'll notice that I'm not taping my paper down, because, as I said, when I decide to do something with it after it's finished, after I finish painting, if I wanted to glue that onto a hard surface, I really don't want, I don't think a white edge. I would like my painting to go, pigments to go right to the edge. And also, because it is so beautiful and thick, I won't have to worry about it buckling. It may become a little puffy in places if there's excess water that's absorbed into the 100% cotton, but for the most part, it's going to stay nice and flat. So I've woken my paints a few times, but I like to just keep them really moist and ready to go. I'm using my Hake brush to add just plain water to my paper. Some people like to add water to the back of their paper and lay it onto a hard surface, for example, like this hard piece of plastic that I'm working on, and it helps to keep the paper. It's almost like a suction, and it sticks to the board so it doesn't move around. I kind of like the option of having, because I don't have a piece of board that's just slightly larger than the painting, I like the option of being able to pick up my paper and move it if I want to have my paints sliding around on the surface a tiny bit. So I've wetted the surface. If you sit back, you can see where your paper is wet. I like to let it sit for just a moment. Let that settle in just a tiny bit. And then maybe just a bit more water on the top area. This is where I'm going to lay my layer for my sky, and I'm also going to, while it's still quite damp, I'm going to lay some background trees in, and we want those to be diffused and sort of misty and shadowy looking in the background. So I'm going to pick up some Mayan Dark Blue, as I am often wanting to do. And I'm going to get those sky shades happening. One of my favorite colors for the illumination, the glow, is Quinacridone Gold. And so I'm going to just add a tiny bit of that, just the slightest bit, because it can be a strong color. So I'm going to scuffle my brush. It's damp, it's not dripping, and I'm just going to dip it once into my Quinacridone Gold, and then just a lightest touch, add it in, and maybe my illuminated pathway is going to come from left to right. So we'll bring that lightness coming through this way. And with a thirsty brush, I'm just going to start to pull a little bit of this out. I just want the faintest hint, and it will dry later, of course, because it's watercolor, but I do just want the faintest hint of lightness there for that pathway that we'll bring through. Now, because this is nice and damp, I've got a little hair on there. Because this is nice and damp, it will continue to diffuse the blue and the gorgeous yellow. And I'm just going to add a little more dark pigment in. Sometimes it's nice to have just the underside of a cloud on the edges especially. And then once I have a bit of that in, a damp paper towel. This has gold and blue on it. I'm going to make sure I turn it so that I have just the blue showing. I don't want to add much more gold and yellow into my sky. And this is the lightest feathery touch with your paper towel, just to bring in a little bit of that light for your clouds. Feather touch with your brush, soften things. We're going to be putting some trees over here, so it's not going to be quite so important to worry about that. But a nice circular motion sometimes while it's wet will give you a beautiful indication of some cloud shapes. I'm taking a paper towel, and I could do this with a brush as well, but I just want to take the paper towel and just pull slightly, just the lightest touch on the surface of my paper, just to take some of that water off. And I'm going to switch now from my Hake brush to my Lebenson 1.5 inch goat synthetic blend. This is the brush that gives me beautiful, beautiful, beautiful shapes. And I'm just going to lay some really deep colors in for some trees and some foresty shapes in the background. I love this brush because it can give me that gorgeous tip on these tree shapes. And then I can use the side of it to pull the pigment out and make them a little fluffier and fatter on the bottom. Now these little ones that I've done here will be lighter and they will fade out in the background. Some of these will be a little darker. And we'll just light hints of trees in the background. Very, very misty, quiet. It's kind of a serene feeling in the background of this forested area. And you don't need much. This deeper pigment that I put on the surface here, I can continue to work with that rather than going back into my palette and dipping my brush again. This paper is holding the water so beautifully. And there's some nice little tree shapes in the background on that side. The blue has worked its way down through the moisture on the page and diffused into the foreground a little bit. I'm going to just go back to my Hake brush for just a moment. And I'm going to dip into my Undersea Green, and I'm going to give that another spray as well. Just a dip in there and create some of the tree shapes that will emerge into the foreground. I love the bigger brushes. You can work with shapes. Adjust your, the edge of your pathway a little bit. And I think on this side, I'm going to stick with my Hake brush. A little bit of the Mayan blue. Now the paper is starting to dry, so things will look a little different as they diffuse. And the shapes will come together. And because I've come out here, I think my path is going to have to work its way back this way a little bit. That's what I love about painting loose on watercolor paper, or any surface really with watercolor, is that you can pivot, you can maneuver, you can change things as you go. So we'll just encourage this to go this way, and I see here I've dropped some blue, so I'm going to take advantage of that and just make them into some more trees. I try not to have things dead center. And so by doing this piece, I have almost made that happen. So I'm going to go in a moment after I get a few of these tree shapes in again. You can see where the page is drying, my tree shapes are starting to be a little more defined and specific. So I'm going to bring these land shapes just out a little more that way. And now I will go back to my Goat and Synthetic Blend brush with a nice little tip on it. A fairly wet mix now, because I do want to continue that, that shadowy kind of effect. And I just want to make sure that some of these trees are a little more defined in the background. Again, I dip the brush and just dab it on my paper towel. I really don't want a lot of water or pigment on my brush at this point in time. I want to be able to spread what's on my page or just out a tiny bit. And the ones in the background, if they have a little less pigment and look a little more shadowy, that's even better. There's a dark piece here. I'm just going to encourage a bit of that pigment to come up. And form another tree there. Lovely thing about trees is that each one is different and unique and perfect in their imperfections. Like they're, you know, they grow like nobody's watching, right? And I think there's enough pigment on these fellows here where I dropped that paint and wanted to, rather than try to rub it off the surface of my painting, I just want to encourage what's there and turn those droplets into another couple of trees. So you can see where the light and the dark is already coming into play with the amount of pigment in certain areas, and you're getting some really cool shading and shadows. I'm just going to add, with the side of my brush, a little bit of the Mayan Dark Blue, still thinking about those shadows, and getting the underside of these shrub areas with a bit of shading. These trees are, you can see now, they're diffusing in the background. They're really quite lovely. I can go in and in the front and add a bit more color and texture. A little bit of a damp brush. Oh, there we go. And then that just allows that to fill in that whole area. And I love that the paint and the water really almost have a mind of their own when you allow them to flow the way they want to on your page, and then you can just allow them to do what they need to do, and sometimes just a little bit of encouragement here and there. And if you allow them to do that, give your paints and the water the time to do what they need to do. You know, fine-tuning can always come in at another time. And there's a lovely little shadow happening back there, so I'm just going to pull something in the front just to make that shadow even more defined in the background. And then this dark piece here can be one of the focal points coming forward. And I will just bring that even further down. And again, with my paper towel, bring in some shadows. You can see where the gold The Quinacridone Gold has just given that light, soft glow. And we'll give just a bit more of the pathway edge. You know, you want your shrubbery falling into the path sometimes and laying over. So I'm going to go back with my hockey brush and the Undersea Green that we used on this side. And I'd kind of like you to see it was wetter here. You'll notice a difference now that this is drier. So this side is going to be slightly darker where the green tones are. And still the green, the Undersea Green is wanting to push away. It's slightly granulating, so it pushes the other colors away. It pushes that that gorgeous blue away a little bit. And I can go on this side again and just bring in a little more of the green. And you know what I'm going to do next, I'll bet. I'm going to go with the Quinacridone Gold, and we're going to let it do its magic. Now I want my brush to be not too dry. I don't want it to be dripping. And I'm going to just give the palette another very light spray. I want that pigment to be ready to go. I don't want to have to dig and fill my brush. I want the pigment just on the surface so that I can go gently on my page, and you can see how it builds its own shrubbery. And even if I put it into the darker pieces of the blue, it's still going to move things around and create those luscious shades of light tones against the dark. And then as we get down here, we have lighter still. Now, because that light source is coming from the back, we do want to have a little bit of that, and I'm just going to dab a tiny bit in, and then I'll go back in later with the Levinson goat hair and synthetic brush. But you can see how these bushes are they're creating themselves. And we'll just, and with my brush, I'm not being really specific. I just want to get these color shapes in and then sit with them for a moment. You know, I don't really want them to be polka dotty, so I'm going to do a little bit of blending and encouraging. And then a bit of light here, I think, and then I will put some dark pieces coming forward. Because the paper is so strong and so gorgeous and still a bit wet, I can pull away a little bit of this and start to create some direction to that pathway. Now this is all fairly wet. Don't know if you can tell from the angles you're seeing it at, but this paper has not been affected adversely from all that water at all. It's just absolutely gorgeous. So many yellows are very staining, and you'll notice that some of them are just not going to budge the way you want them to. And it's hard to clean that from your brushes as well. But what I want to do now is I want to make sure that I've got enough of that coming through my pathway, and now I can bring in a little bit of that blue and green from this sort of edge here, and we'll allow for some shading and some shadows. And just by barely touching with the Hake brush, and it's a fairly dry brush. It's not completely dry, but it's pretty much there. But because the pigments here are still damp and ready to move, if you just barely touch those edges with your brush, you get this gorgeous effect of the shadow underneath some of these shapes that are happening on the edge. So you still get that illumination coming through because you've got the Quinacridone Gold in the background. And now you can adjust that. And as it dries again, it will be even lighter. And so this is where now you get to play. You get to fine tune. You can bring things out, add more shrubs. One of the brushes that I do love is it's just a little hard-edged acrylic brush, or a blender or a scrubber, a watercolor scrubber brush they're called. And once you have some of these basic lines and shapes in and colors, you can work with them to define some edges, pull away some color. It's one of the things I love about not using a reference photo, because very often people, folks will get locked into an idea that this has to be this way or that way. I'm just happy to leave it open to interpretation and go with the flow. If something happens and you can't get the color to change or move the way you want, then sometimes you just pivot and work toward making things work as they need to. Now, I can see where this is still a bit damp, and this dark edge has come out. I want to see if I can actually make those into a bit of rocks, and that will work, absolutely. So there's some rocks just sort of falling out into the pathway. And maybe we could do a few more of those back in here as well. It's so fun to play with these and make shapes. So we've got a bit of rocks. Maybe this is just is a rocky point that comes out. And we'll just leave that like that. I love that these three colors, the Mayan Dark Blue, Undersea Green, and Quinacridone Gold, for me just have such a luscious relationship to each other, and the combination that they bring, to the piece, and allow you to shape and create rocks and formations. I think I'm just going to, just to get a basis here, I'm just going to make a bit of rock shapes down in this edge. Now, we're working on paper. It's 100% cotton, so you can scratch your paper, you can damage your paper. So you want to be gentle, and you'll get a feel as you go along what these will, you know, what your paper will tolerate. Okay, so we've given a little bit of foreground with some rock shapes. We've put some rocks in the middle because we had that gorgeous bit of color coming through. You can soften any edges. You can define edges. There's a little bit of space there where the pigment for my second layer hasn't touched water, so there's some almost like a granulation happening right on the page. And then with a damp brush, you can still go in, define some more of these shapes, but you can see now where these tree shapes in the background have just sort of fallen into a misty kind of dimension, really. And you can carry on with defining your bushes and your shrubbery. I often like to go in with a bit of a nice bright color. It's a bit wet at the moment, so if I was to go in with, let's say, should we go in with a red? A little bit of Quinacridone rose. And just throw in some bushes, a little bit of color, contrasting with that gorgeous gold and green. Because the paper is still holding that water, it is still just waiting for pigment so that it can diffuse it and spread it out into the design. It's absolutely gorgeous. If you can see this area here with the golds and the green and the blue and the rose, absolutely stunning. I may go in later with my Levinson 1.5-inch goat synthetic blend brush, and with a darker color just to define some branches, maybe some foundation for some of these trees and bushes. I won't do that now because the paper is still holding so much water. If I was to try to draw in a fine line for a tree trunk or some branches, it really would just diffuse and make a kind of a dark mess. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to encourage just the rose to come up slightly here and there so that it doesn't look too splotchy. And I see here where it is, the rose is dropping into those rock shapes, and I can just pick some of that up. Damp paper towel. It's not sopping wet. It's just kind of damp to the touch. And now, just pick up just the littlest bit of pigment from the surface, and it will give you some more indication of light play. Just by lightening some of these darkest places up a tiny bit. And because it's damp, because the paper is still wet, it is going to continue to diffuse and move around on your page ever so slightly. So as I said, maybe once it's dry, a few more finishing touches with a pen or my brush tip. I don't think I do much more to this. I love to leave those colors to speak for themselves. I don't want to put too much definition in there. I feel like there's enough on the page now that you know it's a forested pathway, and I'm happy with that. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me here today. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe to the channel.